What was your scariest Halloween? 1. This incident happened to me last year on Halloween. My little brother and I were home alone, since our parents had gone out to a Halloween party. They had tasked us with handing out candy to the trick-or-treaters. This bummed my brother and I out, because we had made plans to go trick-or-treating with a few friends. Our parents told us that we were too old to still be trick-or-treating, and that we could instead invite our friends over to the house and hang out there. My friends declined my invitation to come over, because they still wanted to go trick-or-treating, so that left me home alone with my brother handing out candy. A lot of people stopped by our house, and by 10 o'clock, almost all the candy was gone. My brother and I decided that we'd eat the rest. We were sitting on the couch watching a scary movie, stuffing ourselves with candy, when there was a knock at the door. I stormed off the couch, wondering who the hell could be at knocking on our door this late. I assumed that it was just some late-night trick-or-treaters. Even if that was the case, I had turned the porch light and Halloween decorations off, which should have been a dead giveaway that we were out of candy or that we weren't home, so I assumed it was my parents. Being cautious, I looked through the peephole and saw a suspicious man standing on our front porch. He was wearing a black hoodie with the hood over his head, which made it difficult to see his face. The only detail of his face I could spot was that he had a beard and dry, crusty lips. There was no way that this guy was a trick-or-treater, because he wasn't wearing a costume and was far too old to be trick-or-treating alone. His hands were stuffed in the front pocket of his hoodie, and he also looked very thin. Every single red flag went off in my head about this guy. There was no way in hell I was going to open the door. Still looking through the peephole, I watched as he knocked on the door again. He seemed desperate for us to open the door, and was shaking a bit. It wasn't cold outside, definitely not cold enough for someone to be trembling. He was giving me a bad vibe, and I wanted to get rid of him as soon as possible. "We're out of candy," I shouted to him. I watched as a smile spread across his face. It wasn't a friendly smile either. "Are you alone in there?" the man asked, almost in a mocking voice. His voice was raspy and dry. "Should I call the police?" my little brother asked me quietly, gripping his cell phone. The man let out a low grumble and said, "Sounds like you're not alone in there." I continued to watch him through the peephole. His hands were still wedged tightly in his pocket, and he was still shaking a bit. I began to wonder if he was armed. I decided to take action and spoke to him in the most intimidating voice I could. "Get the fuck away from my house or I'll call the police," I shouted. His smile faded and he bared his teeth. His teeth were piss yellow, and I concluded that he was probably some homeless crackhead. He had a look of fury plastered on his face. Fortunately, he left without trying to break in, probably because he knew I wasn't fucking around with him. I didn't stop watching him through the peephole until I saw him completely off of our property. My brother and I breathed a sigh of relief and decided not to call the police. My brother and I were a bit paranoid after this, and watched TV until our parents came home. We didn't tell them about the man, since he hadn't really tried to harm us. Now when I think back to this, I wish we had called the police, because maybe we would have been able to prevent a murder. You see, the next day we found out that the elderly woman who lived a few houses down from us had been brutally murdered. Her neighbor had found her lying on her front porch, covered in blood. She had been stabbed multiple times in the chest and neck. My brother and I immediately knew who had done it, and we told the police what we knew. They couldn't do much from the information we had given them, since we hadn't seen many details of his face. They went on the hunt for the man, but never caught him. I blame myself for that poor old lady's murder, because I could have prevented it from happening just by calling the police. I think the most disturbing thing of all is the fact that he didn't take anything from the old lady's house. Her house had been left untouched, but he could have gone in and taken what he wanted, since her door was wide open. This means that he just wanted to kill. That was his only intention. He didn't want money or jewelry, he only had the urge to murder. So to the creepy crackhead Halloween slasher, let's not meet. 2. This just happened a few hours ago. I have called and reported it to the police, and I am home safely. But guess I am still in shock. Could do with putting it down in writing to process it, and figured this is as good a place as any to share what happened. I finished work early today and so decided to go out for a run. I set out around 4:30 and decided my usual routes, which cross many roads, will not be very practical. And so I took an alternate route along a canal towpath and some pathways through woods that I knew would be less busy. Everything was going well. I was pushing myself steady until I got to a pathway on the way back around 6 kilometers into the route. It is a long straight path with a canal on the left side, and right there is wasteland, where some factories used to be but have mostly been demolished. It has been left abandoned for as long as I can remember and is overgrown with trees and weeds. But there are the odd bits of an old factory that for some reason weren't fully demolished. As I got level with one part of the factory, which still had some old metal fire escape steps attached to it, I noticed a rough-looking guy sat on the wall with his legs hanging down. He jumped to his feet as he saw me coming and shouted something, but I couldn't make it out. As I came level to where he was, I heard him say, "Wait there, can you help me find my phone?" He said this while he was running down the steps, and so I stopped as I got level with where the bottom of the steps was, meaning we were standing just a few feet apart but with a fence in between us. It was a really old iron fence with vertical metal bars that have spikes at the top like you sometimes see around churches and things. He asked me if I would help him find his phone again, saying he had dropped it somewhere nearby, and asked if I could ring his number so he could listen for it. I felt I couldn't exactly refuse as my phone was strapped to my arm, so I said he could tell me the number, and I took my phone off my arm and unlocked it. He blurted out a phone number but said it far too fast, and it didn't begin with 07, which made me start to feel like something wasn't right. Although I was beginning to suspect at this point, I wasn't really worried. I am in pretty good shape, had a big size and weight advantage over him, plus there was a fence between us. He didn't seem in very good physical shape and seemed like he might be homeless. I figured if he was trying to mug me for my phone, his only chance would be if he pulled a knife, so I made sure to stay a good distance away from the fence and kept my eye on where his hands were. So I told him I didn't catch any of the numbers because he said it too quickly, and he came out with another number. This time it did have 07 at the beginning. I entered 7 numbers, and then he started to look around and saying, "I can hear it, come and help me look," as he looked around at the ground. I was about to say that I hadn't even finished dialing when a much larger black guy appeared from behind a section of wall to my right. He was also really scruffy looking, and from the look of his eyes, it seemed like he was on drugs. He came out saying he could hear the phone ringing over towards him and beckoned me to come through a gap in the fence and help look. The white guy then said, "It is ringing, yeah?" And I told him it was, even though I still hadn't dialed the last digits. And now I was sure they were trying to lure me to come over to that side of the fence. After 2 or 3 times of them both beckoning me to come and help, always insisting they could hear the ring, I heard the black guy say, "He's not going to fall for it." He said it in a hushed way, as if he thought I wouldn't hear, but with it being out in the middle of nowhere, I could clearly understand what he said. The white guy then started acting quite aggressive and punched a tree, telling me he needed the phone badly, and how his whole life was on the phone, telling me to come and help them look for it. While he was punching the tree and ranting, the black guy had taken a few steps away to the right, meaning I couldn't keep my eyes on both at the same time. It was after 5 p.m. by this point, and had gotten dark all of a sudden, which made the whole thing even more unsettling. I noticed there was a gap in the fence where some of the bars had been removed right where the black guy was heading, and I decided at that point to get the hell out of there and made a run for it. Neither of them said anything as I ran away, which makes me sure that they had malicious intentions. If they genuinely lost their phone and needed help, I would expect them to shout, "Where are you going?" or something, to try and get me to come back, but they didn't shout anything. After sprinting for a good 20 to 30 seconds, I turned to see if they were chasing me. They were both stood on the path around where the gap in the fence had been, but were not chasing me. They were just standing there watching me run away. I continued running away but kept looking back every few seconds, until I was out of sight. It was at this point I got off the canal path and onto the roads. The person I spoke to on the phone to report it took my details and the descriptions but seemed to think it wasn't anything worth worrying about, but said it will be investigated. The whole incident has left me a bit unnerved, and I am pretty sure I won't be jogging that route alone anytime soon. 3. This happened when I was 12 and my brother was 17, and is truly proof that the living are more terrifying than the dead. I think about this every Halloween. This is not a paranormal story. The community I grew up in was made up mostly of Hispanic people, so the folklore of La Llorona was very popular in the area and especially around Halloween. For those of you who don't know, the myth of La Llorona is basically a story about a woman who married a rich man, had a perfect life, and then the man cheated on her. She was so distraught that she took her children to the river and drowned them. When she realized what she had done, she threw herself in the river and drowned herself. But she couldn't pass on to the afterlife without her children, so she roams the river looking for her kids. If she spots living children, she will grab them and drown them to take them to the afterlife with her. The story is meant to keep kids from playing in the river. Most of my friends that year were too cool and grown up to go trick-or-treating that year, and were planning on having a party instead. I was really disappointed and asked my brother if he would take me trick-or-treating. He agreed, and we went while it was still light outside, so I would be able to make it to the party before the end of the night. Since we had gone too early, there weren't a lot of people ready to hand out candy, so after a disappointing trek, we started walking back home. On our way home, we passed by a park that had a river running next to it. On Halloween, older teens would usually wait at this park to try to see if they could spot La Llorona. Waiting to spot La Llorona at this particular park was a well-known town tradition that people had done for decades, that still continues to this day. However, there were no kids or teens there yet, because it was still kind of early, but there were people in the park putting on a La Llorona play. We decided to stop and watch it. There was really not much of an audience. It seems like it was just us and another few kids who were a part of the group putting on the play, who were not in costumes and didn't have trick-or-treating buckets with them. When we sat down, a woman approached us and asked us if we were trick-or-treating. I told her we were, and she dropped a small comic book in my trick-or-treat bag and smiled. She seemed very kind and welcoming. The play started, and I got the weird feeling that something was off. The woman playing La Llorona pointed my brother and me out in the tiny audience and asked us what religion we were, to which my brother responded, Roman Catholic. She then told us that La Llorona was also a Roman Catholic and was burning in hell for her sins and rejecting Jesus. She then told us that Halloween was an evil holiday and everyone celebrated would burn forever. The play progressed to getting weirder and weirder, and including a scene where La Llorona started talking about abortion and held up a fake fetus and pretended to eat it. My brother and I got up to leave, but the people stopped us and started yelling at us to sit down, but we kept going. They started following us down the street, and my brother grabbed my hand and started running because he was afraid they were going to harm us. We finally got to our street, and only about 3 people were still following us, yelling at us about how we were going to go to hell and we needed to accept Jesus. My brother and I went inside quickly, and he locked the front doors and then frantically ran around the house making sure all doors and windows were locked before he called our dad at his office. Our dad told us to call the police and that he'd be home in 15 minutes. When my dad got home, the people were still outside chanting and singing some prayer song, asking God to save my brothers and my soul. My dad shooed them away and told them the police would be there any second. They were not deterred and stayed there chanting until the police showed up and threatened to arrest them. I was so freaked out by the events that I decided I didn't want to go to the party and instead just wanted to organize my Halloween candy and put aside all the Snickers for my brother as a thank you for taking me trick-or-treating. Snickers were his favorite. My mom ordered pizza and we sat down to watch Halloween Town while I went through my trick-or-treat bag. I was halfway through sorting my candy when I came across the comic book that the lady had dropped in there. I opened it up, and it truly horrified me. It was a propaganda comic about a little boy who went to a haunted house, ended up being hit by a car on the way home, and went to hell because he hadn't found Jesus. I was really scared, and for weeks as a child, I had nightmares about the event and the comic book. Years later, I asked my mom if she remembered it, and she told me that she couldn't forget and that she and my father had called the police over it several times. Apparently, for years, the group would leave envelopes with mine and my brother's named written on it, with different weird, creepy comic books and handwritten notes about how they were praying for us. Also, invitations to join them in their church, and weird promises about baking us cakes and other creepy ways to entice our child selves into their church. To this day, we can't figure out how they knew our names or who wrote the letters. It really creeps me out that they did this. 4. I apologize if there are some errors or things that may not make sense. This is the perspective my story told from me and a part by a friend. This happened to me the weekend of Halloween, and I personally don't like talking about it, but I've been told by my friend to share it, to get it off of my chest. Me and a friend were invited to a house party just for college students in the richer area of the town, so the house was huge with an acre of land and pool area. This party was themed to be a little naughty, so my friend dressed in a sexy nurse outfit, and I dressed as a belly dancer. Majority of the party took place in the house as there was maybe like 70 people, with the house being very spacious, so not too difficult to get around. I'm not much of a drinker, but I did have some juice that was available. Some friends pulled me and my friend over to take some pics, and I set my drink down. After what felt like an hour of just taking pictures, I found my cup and took another sip, not even worrying that I left my cup alone for a while. Then a man came up to me who looked to be in his late 20s, early 30s. He said my boyfriend's name and said he's been trying to call me. That's when I realized I didn't have my phone on me. I have loads of respect for my boyfriend, and we always make sure to stay in contact with each other, and since he had to work, I promised I would contact him, but I just forgotten. The man said it's urgent and said I can use his phone to call in one of the rooms. So not thinking at all, I followed the man. If my boyfriend really wanted to call me, then I knew it would be something terrible. As we entered the room, I felt as if I just ran a mile and felt winded. The man closed the door behind me and sat me on the bed and gave me his phone. I started to feel more weak, like I just got a migraine and just couldn't call. Then I was helped to lay down, and within seconds, I was out cold. I woke up later, not sure where I was or what even happened. I found my friend rubbing a napkin on my tummy while yelling. It took me a bit to come back to reality, and I realized I was in a bedroom with my friend cleaning some stuff off of me. That's when I had a panic attack and just realized that I quite possibly have been used. My friend calmed me down and told me that didn't happen. She explained that she couldn't find me anywhere and assumed I went to the bathroom. But after like some minutes, I still didn't show, so she went looking for me, eventually checking the bedrooms, and found me laying in bed with the guy something out of my belly button. Apparently he was playing shots with my unconscious body of sucking alcohol out of my belly button, licking salt from my chest, and kissing my lips. She didn't know how long this went on for, but I immediately felt sick and even coughed up from just the thought. Thankfully, my boyfriend got off of work early after my friend told him what happened. He picked me up while my friend asked around about the guy, but of course, no one knew of him or recognized him. I was taken to urgent care and looked at. Thankfully, nothing was wrong with me, and the drug in my drink didn't cause any further harm than just knocking me out. I wish the story ends here, but I started to receive texts from a random guy. At first, he was just asking me random things, and I just didn't reply. But then he showed me a pic of my torso and started saying creepy things to me, and even giving me the impression he's stalking me. This is still going on today, just texting me randomly. I've had the idea to try to bait him one of these days to finally have backup to catch him, but I don't know how smart he can be, and what he will do to me if things don't go as planned. Edit. Thank you to everyone who reached out to me in the comments and DMs. It really makes me feel better knowing not every stranger out there is a creep. Because of my past trauma and now this, I often find it hard to trust strangers. As far as an update, I stopped receiving texts from the guy just before Christmas. However, I often feel a weird sense that I'm being followed when I'm in public, and there have been a few instances that I thought I've seen the man again. I still am spooked at random times when a random man looks at me for too long, but I've learned to get over my past traumas, so I hope to do the same for this one. I have contacted the police and asked what I can do. They took my phone in to copy the texts I revived, but I'm sort of doubtful it will go anywhere. I honestly just believe it was a stranger who had bad intentions at the time and acted upon it. I'm not really even upset anymore. I just want to continue with my life and better myself from any other future events. Sorry, I don't mean to make this update too extended. I don't think anything else will happen, but if it does, I will update when I can. Again, thank you so much to everyone. 5. 2 years ago, my boyfriend, our best guy, friend and myself, all attended a Halloween party for a college we did not go to. We knew very few people at this party, and at the time of this event, they had all either left or passed out drunk. As most college parties do, people tend to get way too trashed way too early in the night. College kids do not live up to their partying reputation, because as this story progresses, understand that everyone in this story is probably way too inhibited for their own good, aside from my BF friend and I, who drink fairly often. The odd dynamic that probably escalated this situation is that my BF and I don't really express PDA, and when I show up with other male friends of mine, people don't necessarily think I have a date at the party. However, I tend to be pretty standoffish to people I don't know, and take pride in my disengaging attitude that I feel prevents creepy encounters. I am not an easy target. This story is about Muhammad, the host of this party. We arrive and find him outside, sitting and talking with a girl. As we approach, she leaves him there. Muhammad tells us he was just rejected by her. We pick him back up and give him the "plenty of fish in the sea" shtick and try not to let it dampen the party. Muhammad takes this as an invitation. Since that moment, he is taking every chance he can to put his arm across my shoulders, getting offended when I brush him off, and following us from room to room. Muhammad is absolutely trashed before we even start drinking, so we are hyper-focused on his attempts. We are still just trying to party, so every time he followed us, we would delicately leave the room, only for him to tag along not only a few seconds later. Our suspicions are confirmed when we're gathering information on our beloved host. We find the girl who had rejected him earlier. She tells us she had never met him before, and before we had showed up, he had tried to kiss her and she was relieved when we interrupted. Other partygoers, when questioned about his behavior, simply said, "Oh, that's just Muhammad when he drinks." My BF and I start kissing sloppily as a defense mechanism, so that Muhammad knows that I am a lady who is spoken for, and I have BF watch my back every time I go to the bathroom so I would not be cornered. Muhammad is continuing to drink heavily. My best guy friend leaves with his DD and leaves my BF and I there. My BF and I are still having a good time, but making plans to leave. We intend to drink the place dry before we go, just to spite our rude host. We're assholes, we know. So he and I plant ourselves on the couch together with a bottle of Jameo. Cue Muhammad. Stage left. He has a full cup of beer and can barely make words or stand upright. He points to my bottle. I hesitate giving it to him for obvious reasons. He gestures again, and I feign ignorance. Muhammad grabs this bottle of whiskey and dumps its remains into his beer hastily. He goes to take a satisfied slurp and spills half the contents into my lap. Party foul. When he realizes all the attention is on him, he stumbles away. We decide that it is time to leave. In the calm of the storm, my boyfriend and I are in the basement alone, laughing and draining the kegs set up there before we make our escape. Lo and behold, Muhammad stumbles down, barely coherent, but looking for trouble. My BF suggests we just make our way past up the stairs and leave, like we had been doing all night. Muhammad has other ideas. I step 1 foot on the stairs, and this drunk asshat put his arm and shoulder across the front of my body to prevent me from leaving. Big no-no. My BF and I have been the most easygoing, non-confrontational people all night, and we have had enough. Dude, it's time to stop, is all my BF said before Muhammad lunged at him, and they begin brawling. Muhammad, being the more physically inhibited one, is not landing any blows but is too drunk to feel pain, so it takes a bit of struggling for my BF and I to restrain him on the ground. I yell that he better fucking stay there until we leave, and we proceed upstairs to inform his friends where he is. On the first floor of the house, trying to collect ourselves, Muhammad emerges from the basement, and he is pissed. He is completely incoherent, and no one can talk any sense into him. The scariest part about this was his eyes, completely bloodshot and void of any awareness, almost animal-like. He goes after my BF and catches me in between them. So my BF and I are trying desperately to fend him off together while all the sleepy drunks are waking up from the screaming from yours truly. I don't know how screaming would help, but I guess that's what I felt like doing. He finally subsides, and my BF and I fly out the door into the street, leaving the door wide open behind us. The weirdest part being that as we left, the other party goers were yelling, "Dude, what are you doing?" Muhammad says, "I love her." The partiers remind him, "You don't know her." So Muhammad, for your own sake, let's never meet